Hello and welcome to MAGA, the podcast. Now, this is not your racist uncle's MAGA. Our MAGA stands for I'm an Angry Asshole, the cult of Donald Trump. And I am your host, a disgusted American. Our mission is to show how Don the Con bamboozled our country. Our goal is to help make sure the cult of MAGA goes down in flames by 2028, to stop it before MAGA becomes unstoppable and our democracy further decays into a dictatorship. If we want the cult of MAGA to end, we have to know how it began and why it spread. We have to go back to the election of 2016. So in our last episode, we explored the decision that the Fourth Estate made when Trump entered the race in the summer of 2015. The summer when they chose ratings over journalistic integrity, when they chose reality TV over reality. In this episode, we're going to take a deeper dive on how mainstream media sold out America, how supposedly real journalists bent the rules for Trump, the staggering amount of free coverage he got during the Republican primary. We'll see what happened to journalists that wouldn't play ball, and we'll also see what rewards awaited the journalists that took the money and didn't ask too many hard questions. If a network did try to stand firm, they got undercut by their peers. When Fox News refused Trump's demand that it remove Megyn Kelly as a debate moderator, they lost his participation, but ABC jumped right in. They were happy to grant Trump's demand that they break their partnership with the New Hampshire union leader, which had harshly editorialized against Trump. Now, the network said it made the decision because of its strained relationship with the newspaper. But Trump took credit, and it left a dangerous impression that he had the power to muzzle uncooperative journalists. And in my opinion, this was one of the few occasions where Trump was actually telling the truth. And then there were the Sunday morning news shows. For decades, they served as proving grounds where candidates had to show up on camera, in person, to handle questions without aides slipping them notes, their facial reactions and body language on full display. Why the programs were called Face the Nation and Meet the Nation. They were not called Call the Nation or Phone the Press. And yet, when the campaign began, all of the shows went along with Trump's insistence that he appear by phone. All except one, Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. And the newspapers were just as bad. When Trump called Megyn Kelly Crazy Megyn on Twitter, it was just another in a long stream of derogatory posts about her. It wasn't really news, but the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, and all the other news stations did a report on it. They gave Trump an audience well beyond his own 7 million Twitter followers and contributed to what ultimately became Friday night's big fight. Trump even told Maureen Dowd once, and I quote, "I do a tweet on something not even significant, and they break into their news within seconds," end quote. Now look, some folks try to fight back, even Megyn Kelly, who was hard to believe because now she's definitely bent the knee. But back then she made a call for solidarity. She said, "I'm the second highest rated show on all of cable news, and I haven't had Trump on in 7 months. It could be done without him too." But when folks resisted, they often did it alone. And then they got undercut by their peers. Now, in hindsight, a lot of people blame CNN for handing over their schedule to Donald Trump, but it wasn't just them. The New York Times Upshot team, using data from MediaQuant, reported that through March of 2016, Trump received nearly $2 billion worth of free news coverage. This analysis by Republican pollster John Van Leeuwen and analytics expert Luke Thompson observed no fundraising operation can match that. It was about twice the all-in price of the most expensive presidential campaign in history. So these guys did this forensic analysis, and they went back to why Trump took off in the first month. And what they said was, it's a pretty simple explanation. He was the most visible Republican by far. Based on data from the Internet Archive's TV News Archive, He received 50% of the overall media exposure when there were more than a dozen candidates. When it was down to only a few, those numbers started to balloon. Trump would get 6 appearances on the major news networks for every one that Ted Cruz or John Kasich got. Trump got 3 times the coverage than those 2 guys did combined. Now, CNN may have led the way, but all of the television was moving in lockstep with Trump through summer of 2015, according to this report. The duo dismissed this response that media was just covering the frontrunner in the race. They compared Trump's share of media coverage with his share in public polls and found that his spike preceded his rise in the polls by a full month. The reality of what happened is that the Fourth Estate gave in to ratings pressure and proactively decided to promote the Donald all day, every day. Trump's candidacy was largely a creation of a TV news media that wanted him, that needed him to be the central character in the 2016 political drama. It wasn't just the network and the cable executives that were doing this. The TV anchors and the producers, the senior executives who didn't deliver, they got ousted. The ones who did deliver these ratings, they got lavishly rewarded. And what gets rewarded and recognized gets done. It became common practice for TV news anchors to have substantial bonuses written into the contracts if they hit certain ratings marks. And with the 2016 presidential soap opera, Trump everywhere saying crazy stuff, they were surely hitting those marks. With that, we got all Trump all the time. It wasn't just a wall-to-wall coverage, it was how he was presented. There's an effort that was made, it continues to this day, where TV news will often try to domesticate Trump, pretty him up, make him appear less gross and offensive than he really is, and to practice a false objectivity or equivalence in his coverage. And here, journalism across all platforms, corporate as well as publicly funded, are guilty. The reality is, Trump's a chronic liar. This has been demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt. He repeatedly makes factual errors, big and small, in his statements. He's a misogynist. He has a cruel streak. He's mocked people's looks and physical disabilities several times. He's condoned and encouraged physical violence among his supporters. He's not the first blowhard on the national stage. In the 60s, we had George Wallace, right, who was definitely a racist. And in the 50s, we had Joe McCarthy, who actually conducted a witch hunt around communism, not this made-up crap that Trump is always screaming about. When people try to resist what was going on, they got smacked down. So when ABC anchor and NPR legend Cokie Roberts decided to tell the truth, NPR took pains to distance themselves from her. The vice president for news at NPR issued a memo to remind staff that she was just a commentator and not a member of NPR's staff. Now, what did Cokie say that was so controversial and so terrible? She said the truth. In a syndicated article that she wrote with her husband, she said, and I quote, "Trump is one of the least qualified candidates ever to make a serious run for the presidency. If he's nominated by a major party, let alone elected, the reputation of the United States would suffer a devastating blow around the world. We are in a time where we have the possibility of going backward instead of forward. What's so incredibly wonderful about this country, which I believe is great and does not need to be made great, is our constant infusion of new people with new energy and new ideas." End quote. Everything about what she said is absolutely true. But the head of NPR made her go and explain the reasoning behind her column, right? The case for it, as well as her right to articulate it. So she did in a conversation with Morning Edition host David Green. And she said to him, "If I were doing it in your role, you would be disappointed. If I were doing it covering Capitol Hill every day, the truth is that commentary is a different role. And there are times in our history when you might be disappointed if I didn't take a position like that. End quote. Koki was a real journalist. She didn't want us to go backwards. So she basically just laid it out there. She said that I know about the dark times in our history when we have gone backwards. Those have not been useful times in our history. Not to point out that this is a moment in history where we could be backward instead of forward might be a disservice. End quote. And look, not everyone bent the knee. It wasn't universal. You had journalists like Koki Roberts fighting back, Chris Matthews, Charlie Sykes even squared off with Trump once.
Ted Cruz or his campaign. So is your standard is that
No, I'm just telling you, he knew.
Okay, but so is this your standard that if a supporter of another candidate, not the candidate himself, does something despicable, that it's okay for you personally, a candidate for president of the United States, to behave in that same way? I mean, I expect that from a 12-year-old bully on the playground, not somebody who wants the office held by Abraham Lincoln.
Even Megyn Kelly did for a while, despite Trump's obsessive attacks against her. On the newspaper side, the Washington Post editorial board, some of the New York Times reporters like Maggie Haberman and David Sanger, they used their time with Trump to probe his knowledge of the issues and expose his ignorance on even basic matters. But overall, legacy media chose to chase the ratings and let the Donald run wild. Many folks in the TV news business were in a state of despair about Trump, even as their bosses in the boardroom were giddy over what he was doing for sagging ratings. And only a few of the remaining old guard journalists were even willing to admit that they no longer have support from the top.
Just personally, what does it feel like to be in this situation? It's a very strange situation. Somebody who's devoted their life to news, but you and I are both, we work for a corporation that owns a news company. And what is that like for you personally?
You really wish the company was behind you 100%, right? You really wish the top echelons of the company would come out publicly and say 60 Minutes, for example, is a crown jewel of American journalism, and we stand behind it 100%. I haven't heard that.
So some folks in the news world were saying it felt like it was over, right? One journalist said, look, we've always done a lot of stupid shit to get ratings, but now it's like we've just given up and literally handed over control, hoping he'll save us. It's pathetic, and I feel like hell. I am swilling antidepressants trying to figure out what to do with my life when this is over. This is unfortunately emblematic of what happened to the news. He started to surrender to this rating pressure. Stories like night after night coverage of Michael Jackson's death or Britney Spears' meltdowns. Those became breaking news. And Trump was perfect for the TV executives managing a business in decline, who were suffering from 1,000 cuts from social media and other platforms. Trump arrived in the scene as kind of a manna from hell. He gave them ratings, and they gave him credibility. So look, you can just blame Trump, but everything he did was with TV News's full acquiescence. He didn't force the networks to show his rallies live rather than do real reporting. He didn't force anyone to accept his phone calls rather than demand that he do a face-to-face interview. That would be a great risk for him. TV News largely gave Trump editorial control, driven by a hunger for ratings. So there'd be news stories on all the networks on a given day, right? Breaking news, Trump speaks for the first time since his Wisconsin loss. They would go on the scene, and the TV reporter would just stand there, off camera, basically useless, as Trump droned on and on. The order didn't have to be stated. It was understood in the newsroom. Air the Trump rallies live and uninterrupted. He may say something crazy, and if he does, well, that's just great television. So the question does become, do journalists even matter anymore? Are they just a free media platform for a presidential candidate that almost every journalist knew could destroy the country if he ever got into the White House? At the end of the day, Les Moonves from CVS said it best. It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. So that's all we've got for this week. If you want to help out the channel, please subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. And tell your fellow disgusted Americans where we are so they can give us a listen. If you have a moment, please leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. Again, so more folks can find the show. That's all we've got for tonight. New episodes drop on Wednesdays. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you have a great night. Ciao. Bye.